Good morning, everyone, and particularly a good morning to the community members of Camperdown and the surrounds. My name is Raj Samurai, and my co-host, Julie Owens, will be conducting the Fire Safety Essentials presentation this morning. The duration of this presentation is between 1 to 1.5 hours, and we're starting now, as we do in all of these situations, is with our Acknowledgement of Country. Today's Acknowledgement of Country is acknowledging the Jurong Wurrung people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we're hosting this online meeting today. And also, of course, pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and also emerging, and of course, any other Aboriginal people that may be present here today. Interestingly, the Dajard Wurrung have successfully occupied this area as a semi-nomadic hunter-gatherer society for tens of thousands of years. What I'd like to do now is hand over the microphone to Julie Owens, who will explain a bit more about the technology that's involved today.
Thank you, Raj, and good morning, everyone. Yes, we are on a webinar this morning, and that means that you cannot turn your video or your audio on. You will be able to interact by answering polls when I put them up, and the chat function. We are recording this session, but the session is being recorded for our benefit. You will not be heard or seen on it. It was only for the benefit of Raj and myself. We will be showing some animations and short videos and some photos throughout the session. Don't worry, it won't be death by presentation, death by PowerPoint, but you will be asked to interact throughout the session. The chat function, if you hover your mouse or any other device, depending on what device you're on, hover it over the chat and a little box will come up, and that's how you actually chat with us. You just type in your questions and I'll be monitoring that chat function throughout the presentation. In fact, we might just have a practice of the chat function right now by letting us know where you're from, in Camperdown, outside of Camperdown, in the area of Camperdown. So if you could just give us an indication of whereabouts you're from, just type your message in there. And as I said, Raj and I'll be monitoring that throughout the session. The other function we have is the polls function. So you can chat anytime you want, anytime you can type in that. The polls, however, are used when we launch them. So we launch the polls, and I'm going to demonstrate that now by launching this poll. And the first poll we would like you to look at is to actually give us an idea of where you're from and how long you've been there and what you know about the CFA. So I'm going to launch the poll now. And the first question is, how long have you lived in the area? So if you could just tick those, we've just gone 1 year, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, or 10 or more. Have you been to a CFA meeting before? And that could be any CFA meeting, just a yes or no there. And how did you find out about this session? And this just gives us some indication of how our advertising and promotion goes. So is it recommended by a friend or a neighbour, through social media, either Facebook page, a newspaper advertisement, community notice board, or other? And then how do you rate your knowledge of fire? That gives us some idea of who we're talking to. As Raj will explain, we are starting with a very basic knowledge of fire, but this gives us some idea. So very low, low, medium, high, or very high. So I'll end the polling and then I will share the results, and we can all see where people are from and how they found out about this session. If that's I'll hand it back to you.
Fantastic. Okay, so don't forget to cross out of the poll when you've made your responses. Thanks for that, Julie. Now, I must say that the actual digital interaction is very easy once you get hold of it. So don't feel afraid to use the chat function whenever you want to pose a question to either myself or Julie. Both Julie and I have been in our volunteer firefighters in our local brigades in Woodford and Wangoom, respectively. So our number one thing is passion. We are passionate about safety, and we are particularly passionate about safety during fire time. That leads into our first slide, and as we said, we're not going to bombard you with lots of slides. The core information that we want you to take away from this morning's presentation is about how you can stay safe in the event of a bad fire day, and more about what a bad fire day actually is very shortly. We want you to understand what your local risks are in Camperdown and the surrounds. I'm very familiar with the terrain. I often travel through Camperdown and have frequented many of the shops and businesses in Camperdown. So I'm familiar with what the locality looks like. We want you to understand what to expect from a fire. Fire is not just flames. There's a lot more to that makes it fire than just flames. And we'll be exploring that very shortly. How do you know if there is a fire? What's the communication channels that we use? It's very crucial to understand that, we have ways of knowing what's happening in our locality, and we have those go-to places. But what are the recognized go-to sources of information? And of course, planning and decision-making. That's crucial for a good, positive outcome when it comes to survival in the event of the fire. And naturally, as the last point says, even the best laid plans can fail. So what are your options in the event of being caught in a fire? Let's dive straight in and start looking about understanding some of those local fire risks. What is it really that's important when it comes to those local fire risks? Well, first of all, Camperdown itself is located in the municipality of Corangamite. And there's a bit of background history. The first British settlers, the Manifold brothers, who were Thomas, John, and Peter Manifold, arrived in the area from Van Diemen's Land, Tasmania, as we know it today, around about 1835. And they established sheep and cattle runs. And they were the early beginnings of Camperdown. The town today is renowned for its classic historical buildings, and central is the 103-foot, or about 31-metre high, Gothic manifold clock tower. You're all familiar with it. I'm very familiar with it, travelling through along the high street there. And that was built in 1897. The town's population is currently standing at about 3,369. Needless to say, as is the case with a lot of our community and rural townships, is the tremendous amount of community spirit that exists in these areas. The fact that communities get together in the event of any tragedy of any kind and are able to pool those resources and be cohesive in making a good outcome. And this is the one thing that underpins the very nature of the Country Fire Authority, is the strength of our communities to come together on bad days. Let's take that one step further. Let's talk about the Victorian landscape. What does the Victorian landscape actually look like? Well, it's a changing feast, basically. We have a huge amount of grassland, a fairly large amount of bushland. There's lots of mountainous forest areas, and of course, farmland, as typified by the Manifold brothers in their early work. Victoria, as the slide clearly says, is one of the most fire-prone areas, bushfire-prone areas in the world, and a lot of us become quite complacent to that, the fact that we do live in such a vulnerable part of the world. Historically, fire has been a big part of the Australian continent for many millions of years. And it's actually been significant in shaping the landscape that we see today. Many fires were started by lightning. Aboriginal people used fire for many thousands of years to care for country. The fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grasslands. This actually encouraged hunting. It reduced levels of that fuel. And we'll talk a lot about roadside fuel load shortly in the presentation. This fire actually kept the vegetation low, so it allowed passage. It allowed you to walk through comfortably without getting stuck. Incidentally, when we talk about record keeping only really started at about 1851 when it came to bushfires and bushfire management. So there's a bit of a background for you there before we delve in now into perhaps more of the modern day picture when we look at what makes up this part of the world. Well, of course, this map shows the different weather districts across the state. And the point to take from this is that each weather district will have its own level of risk. So the southwest will be very different to East Gippsland, or the central region will be very different to the northeast. So let's just bear that in mind. Another important consideration here is what we call the seasonal outlook. What do we mean by the seasonal outlook? Well, this slide clearly demonstrates two elements of the seasonal outlook, and that's temperature and rainfall. The seasonal outlook in a nutshell will define the overall weather trend of what's happening in our weather district, okay? Some of us may have, and some of us may not have, heard of the La Nina effect. We are currently living through a weather pattern called the La Nina. So what does La Nina mean? It means that because of La Nina, we might expect a reduction in the risk of fire or for prolonged fire activity compared to this time last year. Let's just take that a bit further, a bit more detail. So when we look at La Nina, we are saying essentially that there'll be increased rainfall across the majority of Australia. There will be cooler daytime temperatures, generally south of the tropics. However, there will be warmer overnight temperatures in the north. The last La Nina event or weather phenomena happened during the winter of 2017-2018. And then this was followed by El Nina, its cousin or counterpart. And the two work in duality. If it's not an El Nina, it will be a La Nina. And the last El Nina happened in 2018-2019. So you can see that cyclical pattern of these two weather phenomena. I hear you say, well, what does this mean for Camperdown? What does this mean for my backyard? Well, quite simply, Camperdown is in a part of Victoria that has experienced slightly above average rainfall as a consequence of La Nina, and has had above average soil moisture. This above normal soil moisture means there is enough moisture in the ground to make grass grow well. In fact, it causes prolific grass growth. And if you couple that with the rapid drying or curing that happens when the sun is out and we get high temperatures, as we've just had this weekend, the grass will cure or dry very rapidly. This combination of rain, intense drying, rain, and intense drying will cause a huge amount of fuel load. And that's one of the big considerations when we talk about fire risk. Like every season, there is a need to be prepared for a fire that could start as a consequence of this high fuel load. Let's talk about this high fuel load now. And let's talk about local vegetation. I'm just going to open up the chat function, Julie, and ask our listeners to respond to the following question, which is, can you describe what type of landscape do you think you have in the Camperdown area?
We'll just give people a few minutes while Raj is talking to add in the chat function. What sort of landscape is in your area?
Yeah. Okay. So from the responses that we're getting, yes, there's a lot of good positive feedback coming back, but the thing to remember is that Camperdown is typified by lush, green, undulating hillsides. The topography or the fall and the rise of the land is typical of grassland, okay? Now, as we've spoken with the La Nina effect, we are going to have the risk of fast-moving grass fires, and there is no doubt about that. There's also, particularly in the area of Camperdown, there's also that risk of Ember Attack, and we'll be talking more about embers very shortly. Ember Attack from nearby bush to the north, east, and the west. So as you can see, Camperdown sits in that part of the world where we have a high risk of grass fires. Let me just take down, let's just go to the next level of understanding here. Now that we've established that rainfall and rapid curing is going to cause big growth, what does that really mean? We need to be mindful that open grassland is susceptible to the wind. The wind is the driver here. The wind will drive the direction of the fire. A change of wind causes a change of direction of the fire, or the fire front, as we like to call it. The direction of wind is imperative when it comes to undulations, particularly the topography around Camperdown. When we talk about the relationship between hills or elevations, we need to remember as a rule of thumb that fire travels much faster uphill than it does downhill. And as a rule of thumb, we say that for every 10-degree rise with inclination of a slope, a fire will effectively double in speed. Yes, that's right, it will double in speed. So not only will the fire be driven rapidly along at ground level, if you like, forced by the wind, it will actually accelerate even more going uphill. And that's a consequence of what we call the radiant heat, as well as the convective heat. We're not going to get too technical here, but just suffice to know at this stage, it's all about making sure that you know that as fire approaches a hillside, it will travel faster. So don't for 1 minute think, oh, there's a couple of hills separating me and that fire front that's approaching. That actually is not a good thing, because fire will accelerate and get to your home much faster than you may well expect. So when we talk about fire safety essentials, this is an essential that we need to commit to our mindset, that fires travel faster uphill. With the excessive amount of fuel that we currently have in our localities and the current weather pattern, there is a risk of fast-moving grass fires. I'm going to move on to the next slide now, Julie, which is really looking at local risks.
And this might be a good time to launch our next poll.
Absolutely.
So our next poll asks you, there's no wrong or right answer to this poll. It is simply asking you, I will launch the poll now, and it's asking you what you think are some of your local risks in your area. It's multiple choice, so you can tick all of them or you can tick just a couple. So I'll give you a couple of seconds just to tick those. If you just tick which ones, and then at the end, once you've ticked them, don't forget to press the submit button so that your polls count. So the answers can be narrow winding road, large tree limbs hanging over entry and exit routes, the roadside fuel load, fast moving grass fires, or high risk of ember attack. They can be some of your local risks. If you can just tick those and then press your submit button, we will see what people think.
I think I, for one, Julie, would probably tick all of those, because being familiar with the area of Camperdown, and particularly some of those sort of roads as you go down to the golf course on the one side and round to the lakes, they are narrow and they are quite windy.
Yes.
And together with that, you've got inclinations as well. You've got climbs. There's surplus or a plentiful supply of large limbs that hang over many of the roads. So again, that's a risk. And when we talk about ember attack, those large eucalypts that are there will actually be a great area where embers can settle and start some of those spot fires or canopy fires, as we sometimes call them. Fast-moving grass fires, we've spoken about that a lot. And of course, that element is sort of a high roadside fuel. That's an important consideration. Great.
So I've now shared the results of what people have thought. And as Raj has said, most people have ticked each of those as a local risk. So I'll stop sharing those results, Raj, and hand it back to you.
Super. I'll just, and don't forget to close out of your box there after you've viewed the results. That's fantastic. So let's move on now. Can you kind of see the picture that we're trying to develop? Both Julie and I are keen to get some of these underlying messages across to you, which is, look, we've got a brigade, we've got the Camperdown brigade, and I've spoken to Danny many times. They have at their disposal one tanker, one pumper, and one FCV. Sorry, Julie, FCV, just remind me what the acronym is.
Forward Command Vehicle. So
There
that's a vehicle that isn't a firefighting vehicle as such, but it can get people around.
Fantastic. So a forward command vehicle, sort of mobile unit more than anything else, but essentially two resources that will actually fight fire. If we do the maths here, you know, sort of Camperdown is one of our larger regional towns with over 3,000 inhabitants. Looking at about just over 1,600 homes and dwellings. You know, I know that you've got other brigades in the area, but your immediate brigade, the Camperdown Brigade, only has two elements of resource that can be used to fight fires. And we will often sort of pose that rhetorical question here around, well, look, how realistic and how confident would you be to see a CFA vehicle and crew on your drive, on your farm, on your property in the event of a bad fire day? Yeah. It's one of those situations that when you hear it for the first time can be quite harsh and quite hard to accept. But our local brigades and Danny and the guys and girls work extremely hard in a 24/7 capacity in the event of a fire, where even they would be stretched. And don't forget, our brigades will be pulled in other directions as well. There may be a fire in Cobden or some other nearby township where they may be directed to, in which case they are not immediately available for their own turf, if you like. So as we move forward, let's just bear that in mind as well. The element of, okay, don't expect the CFA to be on your drive on a bad fire day. And the message that we want to say here is, look, take ownership. Have that element of preparation. Imagine that they're not coming. Let's just say they're not coming and you're on your own. Make sure that you've got a plan in place for your family, for your friends, for your neighbors, looking after your possessions, looking after your pets, looking after those vulnerable members of the community, and you leave early. Julie, do you want to add anything there before we move on? This is quite an important stage in our presentation.
The fact that you do have to be responsible for your own safety in this situation. The brigade will be there to help if they can, but there are no guarantees.
Thanks, Julie. So far, we've spoken a bit about fire generally. We've spoken about the nature of fire when it comes to the topography and the speed of fire. We've spoken about the limitations of the CFA and what they can and can't do in the event of a fire. But let's now move to what I call the most graphic part of our presentation, which includes two animations and some testimonials from some people. And before I play any of these presentations, I just want to make sure that those people who are listening that who may be sensitive to some of the content to look away and then join us at the end of the animation. So while I find our first animation, which is all about Ember Attack, I'll just hand over to Julie and to say a few words.
So Ember Attack, as you'll see in this animation, this very graphic animation, is one of the highest risks to property damage in a fire.
Yep. I think the actual animation speaks volumes, and I'm just going to introduce it and let you assess it the best way that you can. It is designed to shock, but this is the reality of fire. And this is why we want to try and get underneath the skin of fire to drive this message home, that it's all about taking ownership and being out of harm's way.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of metres into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometres beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
So that just kind of gives you some idea of the very graphic and unpredictable nature of fire. It is a force of Mother Nature, and it is a force to be reckoned with. Although we've spoken about ember attack, which is one of the key components of most fires, it's important to note that also there is the risk of what we call direct flame damage or direct flame impact to your property as well. And this is the concept of where if you have a continuous line of fuel to your home, and we often say that if there is fuel to your doorstep, there will be fire to your doorstep as well. So when we talk about risk and risk mitigation and preparing your home, we need to think more about breaking that continuity of fuel to your doorstep. So we encourage the use of perhaps a driveway, an area of cleared ground around your home, maybe some sort of gravel element that's non-combustible. Now, I do a fair bit of work with the Property Advice Visit Service, or PAVS is the acronym. And the PAVS team constantly door knock and provide a community door knocking service to inform community members, and we have door knocked parts of Camperdown in the past. We do inform our community members about the need and the ways to prepare the homes to limit the amount of fire or direct flame damage. And that's a link that will be available at the end of this presentation, and I'll highlight that to you when we get to the end. But it allows you to download and make contact with the PAVS team, and I can give you a contact name at the end again for that. So from days gone by, you know, we used to say that the vegetation looks to burn. And when we say that, what we mean, and particularly from our sort of Aboriginal heritage, it's all about the germination of seeds. Burning was actively encouraged to allow for the regeneration and regrowth of flora and fauna. I'm now going to move on to another quite graphic depiction of another element of fire. As Julie mentioned earlier, you know, ember attack is by far the biggest cause of property loss during the fire. But I want to take a couple of minutes while Julie introduces the concept of radiant heat to find an animation that will actually give you some understanding of what radiant heat actually is.
So if Ember Attack, thank you, Raj. If Ember Attack is one of the greatest causes of property loss in a fire, radiant heat can be one of the greatest causes of human life lost in a fire. This graphic animation will show you how radiant heat affects the body.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Julie. So without further ado, I'll let the animation do the talking.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
I'm often quite speechless when I see that, because just the very nature of the graphics is enough to alarm me into action. Both Julie and I are passionate about risk and risk mitigation. If you know something is going to impact on you that's going to cause that degree of damage and ultimate death, and we can't stress that enough, then why be in harm's way? Why stay in that environment when you know something as bad as that is coming towards you? It just doesn't make sense. The CFA are passionate, and we advocate for leaving early, having a fire plan, sticking to that fire plan, and having variations of the fire plan in the event of changes, a plan B, C, D, maybe more. The resource pack at the end of this presentation will give you information on how to access a leaving early template. It will allow you to sit down in a constructive, measured, non-pressured way. You know, there's no fire around, but we know what the risks are, and this is what we're going to do in the event of a fire. And we strongly endorse for you to try and access that at the end of the presentation. I've actually put a slide up now which highlights some testimonials, some comments made by folks that were caught in a fire situation. And the CFA often does this, where they will have empathetic conversations with people that have survived fire to get a feeling of the qualitative element of what it is when you're in a fire situation. Some of the comments made here do speak volumes, but I'm also going to show you a small snippet of a video as well, to give you that real emotional values of what people feel when they're in that fire situation. And again, if Julie could just say a few words, and I'll just find the new slide, that'll be fantastic. Thanks, Julie.
You'll see from all of these, the two animations in this video that Raj is about to show, that the people should have left earlier, wished they had have left earlier. And when we say earlier, we mean earlier. Like the first animation showed, if you leave that too late, then your escape route, the way out, could be blocked. And that's what these people, part of their problem was too. And they got to the stage where they couldn't leave, and they had to remember that all of these people survived, but it was still a very harrowing experience.
Thanks, Julie. So this animation is entitled "I'll Never Do That Again." It's not an animation, sorry, it's actual real footage. Thank you.
10 years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Before the fire even got here. So once again, the writing is on the wall, isn't it? You know, up until this stage, we've tried to give you some of the ideas of some of the things that underpin fire and fire behaviour. We've spoken about the intensity of fire and ember attack, radiant heat. We've heard from people that got caught in fire but luckily survived, and they've clearly said they'd never do that again. We need to be sure that we understand exactly what happens to us in the event of a bad fire situation. How are we impacted? And perhaps, Julie, we could perhaps launch a poll at this stage to establish what are some of the factors that people consider would affect their ability to make these good decisions.
So thank you, Raj. We will launch this poll. This poll's asking you, what do you expect from fire and your reaction to it? How do you think you will actually react when you're in a fire situation or a possible fire situation? So I'm going to launch the poll, and the poll asks, what do you think would impact your ability to make good decisions? So think carefully about what you saw in those animations and the people who spoke. So what do you think? And this is a multiple choice, so you can tick one or all of these. Stress, rapidly changing situation, things not going to plan, not having enough time, or a communication breakdown. So we'll just give you a few seconds to answer those, and then don't forget to press the submit button at the end. So there, I'll end the polling and now share the results. And I think, Raj, you'll find that everyone has actually ticked most of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, it makes perfect sense. By far, the highest consideration is stress, because stress is the one thing that underpins all of the others. If you are stressed, as the animation clearly showed, if your cognitive function, your ability to think clearly, to think straight, is impacted, you're going to be finding it more difficult then to adapt to the environment that's around you, the environment that might be alien because you've not prepared for it. You don't know about radiant heat, you don't know about ember attack. It's all too much to comprehend, to absorb and digest in one go. Having that element of preparation, knowing what to expect, will give you a better degree of preparation and so limit your amount of stress. When things don't go to plan, human nature is that we panic because things aren't going to plan. We tend to find that if we run out of time, and time is a critical factor, when the clock doesn't stop, it keeps ticking, and as the time runs out, it compounds the stress burden. It makes it more difficult for us to think, hey, I've got time to do this, but if you haven't got time, it's so hard. Naturally, communication is the one thing that's paramount when it comes to a critical fire or critical any situation, really. If the communication lines aren't clear and open, we tend to find that we're lost and confused. This again compounds stress. So can you see the picture that Julie and I are trying to create here is that fire is not a nice place to experience. It's not a place to be. It's a dark place. It's a noisy place. It often has low visibility. It can often be extremely difficult to know and navigate where you are, which way to go for safety. Why put yourself in that situation? Why subject yourself to that amount of personal grief when you can actually be out of that environment and out early into a safe spot? As the end of that animation said that the best place to be is to be away from there. If you know that it's going to be a pending bad fire day, an extreme or a severe day, and we'll talk about what I mean by severe and extreme very shortly, make plans the night before. Leave early. Maybe early in the morning the following day when you know that things aren't going to be quite as they normally are. Leave early, be prepared. You can always come back. Okay, I'm going to close my poll at my end. I'm sure you guys have already done that. And move on to the next slide, which is all about looking at, well, how do you know if there's a fire? What's your line of communication? And this is extremely important, particularly in today's modern day world. We are living in a digital environment where we are bombarded with information from a plethora of different resources. We have the traditional modalities of television, newspaper, the local radio, and of course the spoken word, the fact that you might hear a conversation with Auntie Mavis over the garden fence when you're putting the washing out, or with Joe in the cafe. And I'll just move on to the next slide to explain to you, well, I'll come back to that in a second actually, previous. Actually, no, what we'll do, Julie, is I will go to this one first, just to give us some idea of what we mean by the fire danger rating, and then we'll come back to how that all fits into the bigger picture. So, yes. Julie?
Yeah, sorry, Raj. Yes, that's a good idea. Before you even know there's a fire on a summer's day, we have our fire danger ratings. And at the beginning of the fire season, these ratings are updated each day. Everyone will have seen one of these boards outside a fire station along the highways, and they will tell you what fire danger it is for that day. I'm actually going to, before I continue with this, I'm going to launch a poll that asks you what you think those fire danger ratings mean. So, for instance, what does the fire danger rating mean? Is it an indication of how likely a fire will start, an indication of how bad a fire would be? And how many code red days do you think we've had in the Southwest in the last 5 years? And how many extreme or severe days have we had in the Southwest? So just give you a few seconds to answer those questions on the polls. Once again, there's one answer for each of those. I'll end the polling and share the results. And it's good to see that a lot of people do actually realise that the fire danger rating is an indication of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. It's not an indication of how likely a fire is to start, because a fire can start at any time, during any of those. But how bad it will be is what the fire danger ratings will tell you. We've had no code red days in the Southwest in the last 5 years, but we have had 6 severe or extreme days. We don't necessarily have, I'll stop sharing those results now. We don't necessarily have a total fire ban on an extreme or very high or severe day. We could have a total fire ban on a very high day. That's a completely different rating to severe and extreme. If you, well done to those people who realise that those danger ratings do indicate how bad a fire will be. If we get to the next slide, we might just explain a little bit more about severe, extreme.
I've just had a chat. I've just had a chat comment come in. Someone saying, "Well, what do we mean?" I know you said something about total fire ban day, and that's quite different to the FDR or the fire danger rating. This person has just asked, "Can we just clarify exactly what that means?"
So, a total fire ban day is declared when the CFA and the government, in collaboration, it is the CFA's responsibility, but it's declared when we want the community to be on a heightened awareness of the risks, and we want things like farmers not to use their equipment, builders not to use their angle grinders. So what we're trying to do on a total fire ban day is actually mitigate that risk by having people stop using those things. And as you can imagine, the economics of that is high. It makes a big difference to people's lives. So total fire ban days are not declared very often, whereas severe or extreme or very high days can be declared without having that economic consequence.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So we'll move on now. And I think you did mention severe, extreme, and code red. So maybe we can talk about these.
So so what I'm saying is don't say it's not a total fire ban. So even though it's a severe day, so then everything's going to be all right. It can be a severe day without having that total fire ban day. So your best option is to actually look at these danger ratings rather than total fire ban. So on a severe day, it will be hot, dry and windy, just the same as it will be on an extreme or code red day. But on a severe day, if a fire were to start, it may be uncontrollable. On an extreme day, once again, it will be hot, dry and extremely windy. And if a fire starts and takes hold, it will be uncontrollable. It will be unpredictable and it will be fast moving. Spot fires will result and they'll move in any direction. That can happen in any direction. On a code red day, they're the worst possible conditions for bush or grass fire. Homes are not designed or constructed to withstand fires in these conditions. Even with the recent overlays of homes, they're still not designed to withstand these conditions. So your safest place is to be away on a high risk bushfire. And of course, leaving early means the night before or early of the day of. Because remember that animation that showed people in their cars trying to get away from their houses or the areas once a fire had started. So you need to avoid forested, thick bushlands and even grasslands when you're trying to leave. So your best option is to leave early. Thanks, Raj.
Thanks for that, Julie. And I'd just probably like to just make one additional comment here, which is, as an ex-Cub Scout of many years, one of the things that was always drilled into us was that element of preparation, and preparation is definitely the key. So if you want to be prepared and do all the things that are necessary to stay away and out of harm's way, communication, as we mentioned earlier, is probably one of the key ways of doing that. I started talking a bit about these elements of communication a short while ago, but just to reiterate, we live in a world of high intensity communication channels, both digital and otherwise. I refer to this as infobesity, an overflow, an overburden of information. We are bombarded, our senses are bombarded from all directions with news of some type or other, whether it comes in our traditional modalities of newspapers and television and radio, or the spoken word. Alternatively, we also have the digital formats and some of the icons that are instantly recognizable these days, the Instagrams, the Facebook, the YouTube, and the list goes on. Now, from a communication perspective, a lot of these means of communication are what we refer to as informal, okay? Informal in the sense that it could be that casual conversation that you have with someone, walking the dog or playing golf or whatever it might be. They are not evidence-based, they are not real-time, and they're not totally credible. We at the CFA would strongly suggest that you follow alternative means of communications, more recognized, evidence-based, real-time information sources. And by far, one of the most important ones that both Julie and I would advocate for would be the Vic Emergency app. For those of you listening who have not got the Vic Emergency app, we would strongly suggest that you seek to put it onto your smartphone. If there's anyone within the listening group that have already got the Vic Emergency app, help your colleagues, make sure, spread the word. It is by far the most effective means of keeping in touch with local fire activity in the event of a bad fire day. And this scope of activity can actually be broadened, and you can make it fit to the area that you might be traveling to, traveling through, etc. So you know that you can plan, and there's that dreaded plan word again, plan your exit, plan your departure away from the danger zone. This slide also shows a number of other means of communication, including the Vic Emergency Hotline, an interpreter service, and of course, the Emergency Management Victoria online. There are a number of more what we call formal means of communication. I've left one of my most critical ones till the end, and that is local news. Local news is particularly valuable in the event of a fire, primarily because local news will be your only means of communication with the outside world through a battery-operated radio. This battery-operated radio should form and be a key component of your emergency kit, the kit that you have ready in the event of having to leave in a hurry. The emergency kit will also contain lots of other items. Julie, do you want to just reiterate what emergency kit should also have?
We will look at this a bit further on in more detail, Raj.
Sure.
But yes, to have a radio, especially if you have left it too late and you find yourself in the situation where you need to know what's going on around you, the power has gone out, you no longer have the ability to turn on the TV. Even sometimes the internet will go down, so you may not be able to rely on your app or your phone. When the power goes down, their phones go out. So to have a battery operated radio at that time gives you that outside communication, like Raj says. Very important.
Lovely. Thanks, Julie. And now what we're going to do is just delve a bit deeper into the triage process that exists through the Vic Emergency app and also through our CFA internet site in terms of the communication that's formally recognised as a warning system.
And this is where it's also important to have that battery operated radio, because if your power does go out, these warning systems are obviously all the time advertised on those radios, especially 774. So the advice, first of all, you might receive an advice, and an advice warning will simply say that there's an incident in the area, something's happening and you need to keep an eye on it. You need to know what's going on. So it's just a notification that there is some activity in the area. A watch and act is when there is an emergency developing in your area and you need to actually take action. So this is the action that you might, this is where you enact your bushfire or grass fire plan. This is when you decide to leave early. This is when you listen to your radio and find where the fire is, or look at your app. An emergency warning comes up, it means that it's too late. You are in imminent danger to take action and you will be impacted. This is where your preparation is most important for if you aren't able to get out in time, what are you going to do? So all of these indicate that you do not wait for a warning. However, you do not wait for a warning. If you get an evacuation, this will is recommended that you follow the procedures that are in place to evacuate. The police will be involved in this. CFA and other emergency services will help, but the police are the ones who do this. And the community information is usually a newsletter, or it could be online, but it's notification about an incident that's happened and where you can get help. It's usually after the incident's occurred or once the imminent danger has passed. Once again, with all of these warnings, we stress that you do not wait for them. You use those means of communication that Raj was talking about before to find out what's going on for yourself. Goes back to our earlier point in the presentation that you need to be responsible for yourself in these situations.
Absolutely. And I think what I might do now is, by way of an introduction, is to bring all these components together in a timeline that gives us some idea of how and when and how important this process actually is and how it actually works. A lot of us will see this more clearly as we show this example.
Because this little animation actually shows that you might be ahead of the warnings, that you might be the one who actually calls 000, or you might be in the way of a fire without actually knowing about it. So let's have a look at this. The fire starts. So a fire starts, and even immediately a fire starts, it's not called in. Nobody might see that first flame that's happened. So it might be less than 10 minutes, say 5 minutes before the fire is actually called in, which means that the brigade pages will go off. So now everything's being jumped up. Brigade pages go off. They come to the station, hop in the trucks, and the CFA is notified that there's a fire. So they're getting their organisation organised for sending out those messages. It's 10 minutes and the fire is starting to get bigger. But it's after 10 minutes that the first advice warning goes out. And remember that the advice warning is really one that just says there's activity in your area. But if you're sitting in that house, it's more than activity in your area. So you're sitting in your house, you're watching TV, it's a hot and windy day, you know it's a high, it's extreme or severe, it even might be high, and you're unaware. This is where what Raj was talking about, your sources of information. You need to be monitoring those sources so that you know that if there's something going on. So you've got your advice warning, but you now look outside and see the fire is very large, and after 20 minutes, you'll get an emergency warning. And that emergency warning is telling you to leave. But of course, in this situation, it is too late. So you'll see by this animation, and so by 30 minutes, the fire is out of control and well past you. So you'll see by this animation that you might be ahead of the warnings. So you can't depend on the warnings for your own safety.
That's a very clear depiction of exactly what it means to be vigilant, to be mindful of what's happening around you, not be in your home on a potentially bad fire day, not aware of what's happening around you. We like to lead this presentation on by way of a segue to, well, how is it that we can stay more vigilant? And that's us to take ownership, for us to use our senses of sight, to actually see embers that might be falling nearby. And maybe, a lot of country folk, as a lot of you I know are, would be aware of that kind of intuitive nature about, hey, the sky is not normally that color, or what's that darkness on the horizon or the glow on the horizon? It's not rocket science. There's something that's not quite right. You might see increased activity in the area, sort of from emergency vehicles, or something as obvious as that. Obviously, monitoring that big emergency app is going to help, because that, again, you're seeing what that yellow triangle is actually doing, what the warning level or status is. Is it an alert? Is it a watch and act? Is it an emergency? So use your senses, use your sense of hearing as well. Often if you're living in a wooded area, because I know there's a lot of woodland around Camperdown as well, you know, limbs or trees that are falling, or the crackling of sound of wood that's burning, all these are obvious telltale signs that something's not right. Smell, being able to smell a different odor in the air, smelling smoke, for example, clear indicators again. And that thing that, you know, if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. Enact your plan, enact your fire plan that you've got ready, do what you have to do, have that emergency bag, grab it and leave. Up until now, we've spoken about the many different elements that make up fire. You know, we've spoken about the fire danger rating and how it works. We've thought about how we can link the fire danger rating to, hey, if it's a high or a very high day, that's going to be our trigger to leave. Or hey, we'll wait till it's severe or extreme, whatever it might be, whatever you've decided, enact it early. Use those credible sources of information. The Vic Emergency app by far is one of the best. Use that and make sure you're informed, up to date. And don't wait for the warning, as Julie said, don't wait for that warning. Be ahead of the warning at all times. That's one way of staying safe. So what we're going to do now in the next part of the presentation, we're about 2/3 of the way through. So thanks for your patience and thanks for the comments that are coming through on the chat function as well. Again, as we proceed through this presentation, if there's anything that comes up that you're not sure about, you want to ask questions, feel free to make those comments into the chat function that Julie is monitoring. I'm very keen now to bring this all together, bring all the elements that we've spoken together in a hypothetical situation that Julie will be going through to give us a better understanding, a practical hands-on of what it means to be caught out on a bad fire day.
Thanks, Raj. So what we're going to do is put all this together, what we have, as Raj says. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. I want you to think about what you would do in this situation. So let's say it's 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning and you look outside, you can see it's hot and windy. It is an extreme fire danger day. You know what the rating is, you've checked that out, but you have to go to Warrnambool. So Warrnambool is about 45 minutes away, but that's where your specialist appointment is. So you need to go, you've been waiting for this appointment. So you decide to go into town. We'll go in along the back way. So it's through Cobden and past the Royal Village. So you're driving along those roads. And remember too, there's not much phone reception along there. That's dropping in and out. You get into Warrnambool. It is hot and windy, and you can feel it through the car, but you get into Warrnambool and you go to your appointment, everything's good, that's fine. You decide to have lunch just at the local cafe before you head back to Camperdown, and you hear them talking about a fire in your area, fire in Camperdown. So you look on your Vic Emergency app and you can see where the fire is. It's a short distance from your house. So you jump back in your car, and this time you decide that you'll go back along the highway, you're smart enough, you're thinking enough not to travel through that bush. So you jump in your car and you head back along the highway into Camperdown, and the road's blocked by the police. You can't get through. So what are you going to do now? You've asked them, you've said, oh, well, I'll go the other way. And they tell you that road is also blocked. You can't go that way either. So what are you going to do? Where are you going to go now? What are you going to do until the road is open? What I might do is launch our poll that asks you those questions. So how well have you planned for this? So I'm going to launch this poll and ask you, where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? Would you be at work, home, or on holiday? Thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared to spend a few nights away from home in an emergency situation like this? So if the police said to you, look, it might be a couple of days before you can get back into Camperdown or thereabouts, would you be prepared to actually spend that night away? And last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with some clothes, important documents, photos, medicines? So I'll give you a few seconds to actually answer those questions. There's no right or wrong answer in this case. It's just what you think. I'll end
I
the
think
polling.
it might be an idea to say that, you know, we don't know who's answering these. It's pretty anonymous. So, you know, don't be shy, have a go, because this all helps everybody else as well. And it's great information for the CFA to be aware of the level of fire knowledge and basically what people are going to be doing in the area on days like this. So, yep, don't be shy. Go ahead and answer. And I'm pleased to see there are quite a few replies coming in. That's great.
So I'll just give you a couple more seconds and then I will share the results. And you'll see, yep, some people will work, some people are home. Not many people are on holiday at that time of the year. Were you prepared to spend the night away from home? Pretty even between yes and no. And last summer, did you have an emergency kit? And no, I can see that not many people actually had an emergency kit. So we'll talk a little bit later about what an emergency kit might mean. I'm going to stop sharing those results and just think about your answers in that as we go into the next part of this hypothetical.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, Julie, when we know that not many people actually had an emergency kit. That's great learning, isn't it? Because it shows us that's one area that we can improve on when we talk about risk management, is to have that element of preparation that if you know it's going to be a potentially bad fire day, make sure you leave with your kit. Have your kit ready. You know, there's no harm in it. Just have it in the car. And that could be your lifesaver.
And there are different ways of those kits can mean different things to different people too. So we'll talk a bit about that in a minute.
Sure.
But we'll continue with our hypothetical. So this time when you hear about the fire in town, you see that it's actually a bit further away from Camperdown. It's not to the south of Camperdown, it's to the north. So it's not in the bush. It's actually on those grasslands and it is a bit further away from your home. You can see on your Vic Emergency app that that indication of where the fire isn't near your home. So you think, yes, I have got enough time to run home and grab some important stuff. You think about all the things that are at home and what you might need. And so you drive home. You get into your drive and you hop out and you can smell the smoke. But you have a look at the app. Yes, no, it's still fairly away. The shaded area still hasn't reached you. It is hot and windy. You can smell the smoke, but you think, yeah, no, I can still see that it's not right there. You can't see. There's no embers dropping or anything at present. So you run inside. You decide, what do you got to get? What sort of things do you need? You start grabbing important things. You start grabbing your photos. You start grabbing your passports. You know where they are. You've been just looking at them. You start grabbing your insurance papers. You're not quite sure where they are, but you know they're in the filing cabinet. So you run in and you look through your filing cabinet and you're finding them. All this time, you can actually smell smoke, even in the house. It is hot, and remember, it's windy. You run out to the car. You find the cat's basket to collect the cat, but you can't find the cat. So you run around the house looking for the cat. You run out to the car and you put your bag of papers in the car and you put your photo albums in the car. You're running around looking for the cat. And then you actually, this time when you found the cat, you've got it in the container and you run outside and you can see this time that those leaves that are falling are actually embers. They're little bits of fire in them. And they're starting to fall around your home. That pile of leaves that you've been meaning to clean up are starting to actually catch fire. You're stomping on them as you go. You've got a surge of adrenaline pumped through your body. You're out of time. How does this make you feel? What sort of things would you be thinking now in this situation? What sort of things would you be doing? And how could it have been different? What could you have done differently in a situation like this?
Yeah, so there's a few chat responses coming through. You know, at the end of the day, there's a lot of considerations here, and we've purposely put together a hypothetical situation that brings together all the elements of radiant heat, the heat through the glass of the door, the Ember Attack, you know, the Ember Attack around the house, the FDR and the fact that it was a severe day and had all those classic symptoms and signs of a severe day or extreme day, which was the wind and the intense heat, we've tried to, as close as possible, replicate behaviour as well. And I think the one thing that we must take away, and there's a comment coming in to say this, that this is just a hypothetical, and look at the amount of information that we are bombarding you with, and this is what you'll be bombarded with, and this is just a hypothetical. It's not even a real life situation. So can you imagine how much more stressful, we spoke about stress as a bigger agent here, how much more stressful it would be had this been a real situation?
And even if you knew what you're doing, you had your photos, you knew which room they were in, you knew where your passport was, you knew where you're in the filing cabinet, you knew where your insurance papers. Even if you knew where all those things were, and as you're driving home, you're in that stress is building, the adrenaline is building, and you're not making rational decisions, just as our earlier animation showed.
Mm-hmm. The take home from this is quite clearly the dreaded, or the most important, should I say, the most important thing is the preparation. The preparation has to be the key. It's about planning ahead, being ahead of the game. It's about staying informed and using your local, platforms such as the Vic Emergency app. And of course, as an organisation, we are happy to provide bushfire planning workshops, and again, information will be available to you at the end of the presentation. Yeah. So I just might make comment about some of the things that came through on the chat function in response of, well, what's the one thing that people could have done differently? And one of the main ones was to not be there, to not risk going back, or to leave early and instigate the fire plan, take the emergency bag, and make sure that they were ready for that day. So it's quite imperative at this stage to note that some of the other considerations were that if you were in that situation, would you attempt to leave? And if you were going to leave the home with all these embers flying around you, which way would you go? Would the exits be free? Would there be a huge volume of traffic on the roads? Where would the kids be? Are they still at school? Are they being cared for? Is Francis still doing her horse riding class, or is Jake doing his footy training? There are all these other elements that we need to consider. What's happening to Auntie Flo, who's a vulnerable member of the community, and she's got 5 dogs that she looks after who are the centre of her world? What happens to them on such a day? What's the plan? And do you fit into that plan? Are you a carer for that person? This is why it's pivotal that a fire plan is made inclusive of community members if need be, and plans B, C, D, and E need to be in that plan to make sure that you cover most outcomes or most options. I'm going to move on to the next slide now, which is a comment around COVID-19. This pandemic is still around and may well be around for a while yet. So as a CFA directive, we like to inform our community members that you can leave a high-risk fire area on the day of a high fire danger. If it's such that you are self-isolating, it may well be very important for you to inform your next place that you are self-isolating and to manage a COVID-safe plan at that new location. It's also okay for you to travel for the purpose of preparing your property during the fire season as well. What I'm going to do now is talk about the final element of our presentation this morning, which is all about survival options if your plan fails. And a lot of this consideration has already been made when it comes to radiant heat. Our radiant heat animation clearly showed the importance of having maximum coverage of all bare skin as much as possible for best protection from the penetrating and very harsh and indiscriminate nature of radiant heat. So this actually is a great consideration for the emergency bag that Julie is going to talk about later. The emergency bag should contain all of these elements, just in case you are caught out and need to protect yourself.
That's right, Raj. If you have this emergency bag, say at your front door, so yes, you've come back because you haven't planned to be away and you've had time to come back. If you have this emergency bag at your front door with your cover, all the things to cover you up with your natural fibres, shirts and boots and pants, you have your photos and your medicines and everything that you need in that emergency bag. You might even have your contact details or your people who rely on you, their details in that bag if you haven't got them on your phone. So that you've got all that with you. You grab your bag and then you run back to your car, you hop in your car and you drive away and you're safe. So you haven't left early enough, you haven't taken that bag with you when you first went into Warrnambool, but you've mitigated the risk in some way in being that prepared.
Fantastic. And again, an example of what an emergency kit contained will be contained in the resource template Leaving Early that is available through our resource hub. And again, you know, the only real protection from radiant heat is to be preferably sheltering behind or inside a solid object of some kind. This could provide protection from that invisible nature of radiant heat, which, as you know, arrives way before the flames actually get there. Radiant heat does travel laterally or in straight lines. It can only be blocked by these solid objects. Remember, it can travel through glass, so be away from any glass that may explode or shatter. So seek refuge behind or inside. Certain elements within our environment, and Camperdown is very typical of this, you know, water courses that exist. Seeking shelter in the event of being caught out in a fire in a water course is recommended and safe. In a dam of some kind, in a swimming pool, anywhere where water will give you a level of protection. We have to pay particular attention to advice when it comes to seeking refuge in a stationary vehicle, be it a car, van, truck, wherever it might be. One has to be extremely careful in this scenario because it's not a pleasant place. And Julie's probably going to give you a bit more description around why it's probably not a good idea to seek refuge in a stationary vehicle.
It might be a good idea to point out too, Raj, that even a dam or a swimming pool or a river, it still is going to be a very uncomfortable and not completely safe place to take refuge. But it is there if it is the absolute last resort. It shouldn't be in your plan that that's where you're going to seek refuge. Your plan simply should be you are going to leave early. You will prepare your property, but you will leave early. To seek shelter in a car is a very last resort. Remember that cars are designed to get people from place A to place B. They're not designed to protect you from fire. And you should never drive through flames, through a fire. But if you do have to seek shelter in that car, if you are caught out, then you should try and park off the road, preferably in a low fuel area or a burnt area. You need to keep your lights running. You need to get down below your window level because of that radiant heat. You should have a woolen blanket in your car that you can put over yourself to protect yourself. You need water for hydration for yourself, not to put on the blanket. One of the most important things is not to stay on the road. Try not to stay on the road because this could block the road for emergency vehicles, or it even might cause accidents of other cars trying to get out. It will be very smoky and hot. Do not drive fast. You cannot drive fast. It will be impossible to see trees or ditches where you can have an accident, and having an accident is absolutely the worst thing that you could do in a situation like this. So the best place, and I make no apologies for saying how dangerous this could be, to be in a fire, so the best place would be to leave early and not put yourself in that situation in the first place.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to move onto another slide now, and this is probably one of our final slides. And again, thanks for your patience so far. And this is quite a pivotal slide. And we mentioned last resort, that word last resort. Now we talk about bushfire neighbourhood safer places or place of last resort. And by their very nature and by their very name, these are strictly at the very lower end or the bottom of your option list when it comes to surviving a bushfire or wildfire. So this is about going to a place that's designated, and I'll highlight the ones that exist in the locality of Camperdown. But suffice to say at this stage that they are a last resort, not to expect 5-star accommodation. Don't expect to be treated well in this sort of environment. It will be an area that's purposely designed to protect you from radiant heat as best can be. It's designated in the sense that it's got a minimum fuel load in the locality. It's not going to be a comfortable experience. Let's leave it at that. In terms of what I've identified the local one in Camperdown, it's actually the service road on the north side of Manifold Street, including the Central Reserve, and that's within 5 kilometres. So there's one very close to Camperdown, and as I say, it's on the service road on the north side of Manifold Street. If that, for any reason, is not a good option or not an option at all, which it shouldn't be because it is a last resort, other options include Cobden and nearby Noorat. So Cobden is the Curtis Street median strip. That's about 15 k's away. And your third one is Noorat Recreation Reserve, which is just within 20 kilometres away. The bushfire place of last resort is denoted by this green sign, as you can see in the top left screen and bottom left screen, with images of people congregating together. I often show this slide towards the end of the presentation just to give you some idea of the very nature of fire and the many different faces of fire. All very invasive, all very harsh and harrowing environments to be in. Bushfires, fast-moving grass fires, the plumes of smoke. The images can be very graphic, and for those that have found any elements of this presentation in any way sensitive, we apologise for that, and we will offer support in that regard, and I'll give some contact details at the end. These are the key messages so far, and we've dealt with a lot of these repetitively throughout the presentation, and that's been done intentionally to drive home this message of preparation is the key. Your survival is paramount, and the only way that we can have survival during the fire situation is to leave early. Leave early and be away from the danger. And as I say, the CFA also offer bushfire planning workshops to help you, and again, those resources will be available to you. It's crucial also for you to have an understanding of the capacity of the local brigade. So connection with your local brigade. And as I mentioned, Danny Gordon at the early part of our presentation, Danny will be more than happy to answer any queries or concerns or offer a guidance around some of the elements that we've spoken about during this presentation. Danny, who's from Southwest District 6, was kind enough to give me his mobile number as well for contact. So feel free to contact him should you feel there's a need to discuss any element of your fire plan, fire safety, or just further information around fire. A few helplines here. Before we sign off, I'd like to get Julie just to launch our final poll as well.
Yes, so our final poll simply asks you, this is really for our benefit, for the CFA's benefit. Did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfire risk or grass fire risk in your local area? And would you recommend this meeting to family, friends or neighbourhood in a fire-prone area? So if you could just give us some indication of whether it has given you a better understanding, whether or it's simply confirmed what you already knew, and would you recommend it? If you could just let us know that, that's for our own benefit. And as Raj says before, we don't know who is answering what question. So be assured that we can't trace you. So I'll just end that poll. I'll share the results, and it's really good to see that it has confirmed what some people already knew, and it has given other people a better understanding of the risk, and they would recommend this this to other people. So thank you for that. Thank you, Raj.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks for your help this morning. Now, I would just like to close by first of all thanking Julie for her help, but also to thank you for attending this morning's online FSE session. This FSE session will be recorded and has been recorded so that you can actually view this. If any members of the community have not been able to view this in real time, it's available for you to view at your leisure. And as I say, the link for that will be available to Danny, your CFA captain, who will be able to distribute it. And certainly if anybody else would like to supply me with their contact details, I'm happy to send it to them directly. It will also be on the CFA Facebook page, so that'll be available to you also. And I'll make sure the link is available to Danny. Thank you. Stay safe, be prepared, and make sure that you all know that fire is a dangerous concept and we all need to stay safe during this time. Thank you for joining both Julie and myself for the session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.